The road between the train depot and Willow Gap was longer than Mae Collins had imagined. On the train, it had been nothing but a thin line of ink on a map and a few words the conductor mentioned in passing. But once the wagon wheel snapped clean through, the driver cursed under his breath, promised to go find someone back in town, and left her alone in the open grass. That short stretch of road suddenly stretched out into forever. The wind tugged hard at her thin cloak, hem of her dress slapping against her legs. The sky was so wide, there didn't seem to be any one spot firm enough for her shaking feet to stand on. No fence, no porch, no storefront to step into. Just an old trunk and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding so fast she could hear it in her ears. Every time the wind shifted, the wagon creaked and popped, and she felt more and more like a piece of freight someone had forgotten. Back in her old town, Mae could at least have turned around, gone to her mother's house or her brother's, even if all she got there was another round of scolding. Out here, on strange land, she had nowhere to go back to. Behind her lay the tracks the train had just pulled away from. Ahead was a town she knew only from a few ink lines, in letters written by the man people liked to call her lucky husband-to-be. Under her feet was fresh dust, the kind that had never touched the hem of her dress before today. She looked around and told herself she was still in control. It was just waiting, she thought. The driver will come back, soon. The wind answered by slapping more grit in her face, stinging her eyes. The sun was not yet harsh, but the emptiness was what wore her down. She pulled her collar closer with one hand, the other still clamped on the handle of the trunk, as if the moment she let go her whole past would roll off the road and disappear. A black speck appeared on the horizon. At first, Mae thought it was a trick of the light, but the speck grew, pulled into the shape of a man on horseback. The horse was dark, moving at an easy, unhurried pace. The rider's hat was pulled low, his coat dusted from collar to hem. With each step closer, her heart beat harder. Two words flashed across her mind: salvation and trouble. Out west, a man on a horse could be anything. Good, bad, drunk, or just a man who knew nothing but his own needs. And a woman standing alone by the road was the kind of sight that made some men think they had more right to questions than they really did. Mae swallowed, straightened her shawl. She tried to square her shoulders, though her legs were starting to ache. The lesson she had carried from her mother's house was never let anyone see you too weak the first time they lay eyes on you. But that was a lesson meant for parlors and tea tables, not a bare road with no shade. The rider slowed when he saw the broken wagon and the small figure beside it. He did not spur his horse past the way many men would have. He looked, just looked a moment longer than most. From his side, the picture was simpler: a busted rig, a trunk, a woman in a worn traveling cloak, hand on the handle so tight her knuckles had gone white. In Eli Carter's head, the first word that rose was not poor thing, but trouble. He had promised himself years ago to steer clear of anything that might tie him to more responsibility. Cattle, fence lines, dry spells, and rainy seasons were already enough to cost him his sleep. One more person, especially one from back east with that particular waiting look in her eyes, was something he figured he did not need. He almost touched his heels to his horse and rode on. His mouth even opened on half a sentence. "Sorry, I don't have time for..." Habit told him to keep going, the way he had a dozen times before. But the words died in his throat when he saw her fingers shaking on the trunk handle each time the wind hit, saw the leather worn through at the toe of her boot, saw the way she was holding her calm together and staring into a world that offered her nothing to hang on to. In that small space of one caught breath, in a pause between words that were about to be refusal, he changed his mind. Eli checked the reins, let his horse slow to a walk, and angled off the center of the road toward her, close enough to speak. Not so close he'd pin her against the broken wagon. "When did it break?" he asked, his voice low, neither friendly nor cold. Mae needed a few seconds to understand he was talking to her. "About an hour ago," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The driver said he'd come back, but he hasn't." Eli glanced up at the sun, then down the road toward Willow Gap. He knew that stretch better than she ever could. Knew that if the driver had to walk up and down those hills, find help, find another team, there was no way he'd be back before late afternoon. And out here, late afternoon came with harder wind and sometimes an early storm. "Town's a few miles yet," he said. "You planning on standing here till dark?" "No," Mae answered quickly, though in truth she hadn't let herself think that far. "I just don't know where else to go." He nodded once, as if confirming what he'd already guessed. "You headed for Willow Gap?" "Yes," she said. "I have someone waiting." Eli heard someone waiting the way a preacher hears a confession. It might be a husband, a fiancé, kinfolk. Whatever it was, he could hear the weight in the way she chose the words. Like waiting was more duty than joy. He drew a slow breath. This was exactly where he had to decide. Ride on and leave her with the wide sky and a hired man's vague promise, or turn his horse, put his hand into something that wasn't his business, and accept that once you take someone a ways down the road, it gets hard to go back to being a bystander. You can walk 5 miles on dusty trail in the afternoon sun, dragging that trunk, he said, meeting her eyes. Or you can get on the horse, and I'll take you somewhere with a roof and water. After that, you decide the rest yourself. Mae looked at the horse, at the broken wagon, then at his sun-browned face. There were no sweet promises, no trust me spoken like an order, just a plain choice set in front of her. She tightened her grip on the trunk handle one last time, then nodded. "All right," she said, "but let me get up by myself. I don't like being pulled." Eli raised an eyebrow, but did not question it. "All right," he said. "I'll hold the saddle and the reins. You take it slow. If you need my hand, you say so." And there, in the middle of all that wide, empty country, 2 strangers started sharing a stretch of road. Not because of any grand promise, but because of one held breath in the middle of a sentence that almost turned into no. The horse stood steadier than Mae expected. Its back was warm, breath slow and even. Eli kept the reins close, one hand resting lightly on its neck, as if he were calming both the animal and the woman about to climb on. "Foot in this stirrup," he said calmly. "Hand on the horn. Take it slow. If you don't feel steady, say so. Don't force it." Mae nodded, drew a breath, lifted her skirt just enough, and set her boot in the stirrup. Her knee trembled, but she gripped hard and pushed up. Halfway, her foot slipped a little. Instinct tightened her jaw. She braced herself for a hand to clamp around her wrist and yank, the way men had always helped before. The grab never came. "You all right?" Eli's voice came from a little distance. "If not, I can lift from behind. But you tell me before I touch you. Deal?" A question, not an order. Mae blinked. "I need a little help," she admitted, voice low. Only then did Eli step in closer, fingers brushing the back of her calf, giving one quick, firm boost so she could swing into the saddle. No grip on her wrist, no arm around her waist. Just a brief, careful touch and gone again, as if he were afraid of his own strength. Once she was seated, he walked around, mounted his own horse, and kept just enough space between them that if she wobbled, she wouldn't bump into him. "Can you manage?" he asked, glancing back. "I think so," Mae said, hands still unsteady on the reins. "It just feels strange. I don't ride much." He heard the little slip of "I" turning toward "I'm used to," and then stopping, but let it pass. "We'll keep it slow," he said. "If you need to stop, say so. No sense pretending you're used to it if you're not." They started off. Dusty road unwound in front of them, high sky overhead, wind carrying the smell of dry grass. After a few minutes, the rhythm of the horse smoothed out, and Mae began to find it. She tried to let her shoulders drop, to move with the motion instead of bracing against it. "You live in Willow Gap?" she asked, mostly to drown out the sound of her heartbeat. "Couple miles past it," Eli answered. "Ranch out west. Cattle, some horses, a woodhouse that doesn't leak too bad. Towns just for buying salt and hearing more talk than a man needs." "Do you often pick strangers up off the road?" she asked, a flicker of teasing in her voice that surprised her. "No," he said honestly. "I avoid it." He paused, then added, "Guess today the sun cooked a little sense out of me." Mae smiled, her first real smile since the wheel snapped. "If that's what heat stroke looks like, I ought to thank the weather." They rode in silence for a while, the creak of leather and the clop of hooves filling the space. Mae looked around at the wide land on both sides. Back east, every road was hemmed in by fences, trees, houses. Here, everything was open, nothing to lean on. It felt like breathing and falling at the same time. "You said someone's waiting for you in Willow Gap?" Eli asked, keeping his tone flat. "Kin?" Mae hesitated. This was usually where she said a cousin or some distant family, to head off whispers. But here there was no one listening but him. The lie felt heavier than the truth. "A man who wrote asking to marry me," she said, looking down at her hands. "He runs a general store. Widower. Folks back home say it's a good chance. I've never seen him, just ink on paper." Eli didn't act surprised. Mail-order marriages weren't unusual out here. "Do you want to marry him?" he asked, as simply as if he'd asked if she was hungry. The question caught her. No one had ever put it that way. They'd asked if he had money, if he drank, if he hit his first wife, if the store did well. No one had asked what she wanted. She faltered. "I want to get out of my brother's house. Mother's place has no room left. There, I'm just a shadow to make the house look like it still has a woman in it. Maybe being married to someone, anyone, would be easier to breathe." "Not sure," Eli said quietly. "Depends on the man." He did not turn around, but something in his voice shifted, the sound of someone who'd watched some marriages turn into anything but a way to breathe. "And you?" Mae asked, glad to steer the talk off herself. "Anyone waiting at your ranch? Wife, children?" "No," he said. "Just me and the stock. When it comes to people, the fewer under my roof, the better I sleep." It sounded like a joke, but there was weight under it. Mae heard it but didn't know where it hurt, so she left it alone. The silence that followed was not quite comfortable, but not sharp either. The sun slid west. Their shadows stretched long over the low rises. Ahead, the road dipped toward a narrow valley. In the middle of it, a shallow creek glinted under the light. "Stream ahead," Eli said, voice dropping a notch. "Water's not deep. On most days the horses walk it easy. We'll stop a bit on the bank, let them drink, then move on." Mae nodded. Normally that would have eased her. Water meant cool air, a place to rest. But an old picture slid into her mind. A flooded river back home. A neighbor's child slipping, arms flailing, swallowed in the brown rush and not coming back up. Her palms dampened around the leather. Eli did not look at her, but his shoulders tightened a fraction as he watched the creek. To him, that little valley was not just a watering spot. It was where, years ago, he'd pushed a horse a shade too fast and hadn't made it back in time. Two strangers rode toward the same thin line of water, each carrying their own memory of what they were about to cross. Neither spoke it aloud, but there, between the sound of running water and the shift of the wind, a very small moment waited, one that would make them choose, rush like before, or stop. The creek came into full view as they rode down the slope. It was not wide, just a thin silver band stitched across the little valley, water slipping over stones with a soft clatter. To the eye, there was nothing to fear. But with every step their horses took downhill, both Mae and Eli felt their hearts grow heavier. "Here's our rest," Eli said, keeping his voice even. "Let the horses drink. We will catch our breath too." They stopped on the damp sand of the bank. Eli swung down first, loosened the cinch, and let his horse drop its head to the water. Mae slid down more slowly, her feet wobbling when they hit the ground. She drifted a few steps toward the edge, stopping short, staring at the pale brown current curling around the rocks. The sound of water in her ears pulled an old noise back with it. A childhood river in flood, the neighbor's child slipping on the slick bank, the mother screaming, grown men shouting, "He can swim!" And then, in one blink, that small head gone under the muddy rush and never breaking the surface again. Mae remembered herself frozen there, arms locked around an empty bucket, useless, watching. "You all right?" Eli's voice cut through, bringing her back. "I'm fine, just a little dizzy," Mae said, though her eyes were still fixed on the water. Above them, the clouds had thickened. A colder gust came down the valley, roughing the surface of the creek. Eli looked up at the sky, then across to the far slope. He knew exactly where the trail climbed toward Willow Gap on the other side. If they crossed now and got up that hill, even if rain came, they would be closer to town than to open range. "We should cross," he said, old cowboy instinct kicking in. "Sky is not looking friendly. It is safe enough if we go now." He mounted again and rode his horse down toward the edge, then turned to motion Mae forward. "Get back on," he called. "I'll take the lead, your horse will follow. Hold tight to the horn. Don't look down at the water, just watch my horse's back." Mae swallowed. Being told "don't look down" only made her more aware of the shifting surface below. But she knew staying put on this side would not help when the storm finally dropped. She drew a breath and climbed back into the saddle. She was steadier than before, but her shoulders were hard as boards. Eli guided his gelding into the creek first. The cold water slapped against the animal's legs. It snorted, then eased forward when he spoke to it low. Mae's horse followed, hooves slipping a little on smooth stone. The sound of the water grew louder around them once they reached the middle. "Just keep hold of the horn," Eli said over his shoulder. "And we are almost through." That was when the wind shifted all at once, slamming down the channel. Somewhere a bird shot up from the reeds, shrieking. Mae's horse jumped, planted its feet, water splashing high. It shuddered, head jerking up, eyes rolling white. Mae let out a small cry. Her fingers slipped off the reins and clamped around the saddle horn, her whole body locked up, breath chopped short. Her gaze sank to the swirling water right by the horse's legs. For a heartbeat, she was no longer in a shallow creek near Willow Gap, but back on that riverbank where a child had gone under and never come back. Eli twisted in the saddle just in time to see it. Her horse was not quite out of control, but one hard kick, one sharp shout at the wrong moment, and it could easily lunge sideways, dragging horse and rider into the deeper bend. Every old reflex he had yelled the same thing he had always told himself. Hurry them through, just a little more. His hand tightened on his own reins, ready to jerk and drive both horses hard toward the far bank. It was what he had done with cattle, with friends, with his little sister Annie years ago. Just push on, we are almost there, he had told her, right before the water rose faster than he'd believed it could. In that suspended moment, everything slowed. He saw Mae's face clearly, and it was not just fear of falling. It was the raw, deep terror of someone who had watched water take a life before. Her fingers were bloodless on the saddle, her shoulders shaking, her lips pressed so tight they'd gone pale. And Eli knew that if he rushed her now, even if they made it to the other side in one piece, she would carry one more memory of a man who never listened to her fear. He had already lived more than 10 years with the memory of pushing too hard, too fast. He did not need another ghost riding his shoulders. The hand that was about to yank his reins stopped in midair. Instead of driving his horse forward, he eased it down, asking the animal to stand firm in the current. "It is all right," he said, lowering his voice instead of raising it. "We are going back. Not worth chancing it." Then Eli did the thing most cowboys hate to do. He swung down right there in the cold water, boots filling up to the calf. He walked along the front of Mae's horse, laying one hand on its neck, taking the reins close under its jaw with the other, so he could feel every step. The chill cut through his pants, but he hardly noticed. "Mae," he said, looking up at her, calling her by name for the first time. "Look at me, not at the creek. We're going back to the bank. Slow. You do not have to race the weather today." She dragged her eyes off the water and met his. There was no irritation there, no hurry, only a quiet focus and a hint of apology for having led her out this far. He turned the horse carefully, leading it step by step. His own followed, steady as if it knew better than to act up now. The water slapped his legs, icy, but the current felt less menacing now that he had taken the speed out of it. With each step, he murmured, "Good, just like that. Almost there. We are not in a hurry." When the horse's hooves climbed back onto damp sand, Whitey let out a breath she had not known she was holding since morning. Her whole body shook, not from cold, but from the strain letting go. Eli released the reins and let the animals step up onto dry ground. He glanced up at the sky. The clouds were darker, sure enough, but he understood. Turning back to this side, finding a higher spot to ride out the rain, was better than betting one more soul against a few miles of road. In the moment he stopped his hand in the middle of that creek, saw the fear in Mae's eyes, and chose to backtrack instead of push. Something quiet shifted between the two strangers who had met only that afternoon. It was not a promise, not a declaration. It was simply one small decision. This time, he would not hurry her through. They did not go back the way they had come. Instead, Eli led the horses along the slope, climbing toward a higher patch of ground above the creek. The rain started in thin needles, the first drops cold and sharp on their faces. "There's a rock shelf up there," he said, his breath showing white in the chill air. I used to ride storms out under it. Not a house, but dry enough to get through a night. Mae did not argue anymore. After feeling the water slap at the horse's legs and seeing the swirl so close to her boots, everything else now seemed safer by comparison. She rode in silence and let Eli choose the path. Her insides still trembling in a way she did not quite have words for, part fear, part strangeness, part relief. The rock ledge was just as he had said, a big slab jutting out of the hillside with a dry hollow beneath, just big enough for 2 people and 2 horses to squeeze in out of the rain. From there, looking down, the creek was only a dark streak, its sound softened by distance until it seemed less like a threat and more like background. Eli tied the horses to a scrubby tree, pulled their saddles, and patted their necks. "You 2 are taking some rain tonight as well," he muttered to them, the way a man talks to old companions. Mae stood nearby, hugging her coat tight. Up here the wind blew harder, and the rain thickened, drumming on the stone above them. Eli gathered what dry branches he could find near the back of the overhang and coaxed a fire to life. Soon a small flame crackled up, orange light dancing on the rock and along Mae's cheekbones. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the flattest stone. "Get close to the fire. No use catching a chill before you even make it to Willow Gap." Mae sat and held her hands toward the heat. The shaking inside her began to sort itself. The part from the cold faded first. The part from fear stayed, but no longer gripped her chest as hard as it had in the middle of the creek. "You've been through that crossing a lot, haven't you?" she asked, watching the flames but clearly reaching back to what had just happened. "Yeah," Eli said, settling opposite her with his back to the stone. "On a bright day, it looks like nothing but a puddle. That is how it tricks you." He was quiet a moment, weighing something. Then he chose not to walk around it. "I lost my sister there," he said plainly. "Spring flood, years back. I pushed her too fast. Thought, just a little more and we'll be across. Water came up quicker than I believed it could. Her horse spooked. It never made the bank." Mae looked up. His face was the same as always, sun-darkened, cut in hard lines. But now she saw something in his eyes she had not seen down in the water. A long tiredness that had healed over but never really gone away. "You couldn't pull her in time?" she asked, knowing it pressed on a tender place. "No one pulls faster than the river," he said with a small shrug. "All I know is I decided quicker than I understood. Ever since, every time I ride through there, I think, if I had stopped a breath sooner, turned back, maybe it would be different." He watched the fire for a moment, then lifted his gaze to her. "Today I saw that same scared-to-death face again. On you," he said, using her name for the second time. And I thought, no, I do not need another memory like that. Mae let out a tiny laugh, but her eyes stung. "I lost a child too," she said softly. "Not mine. The neighbor boy. I was standing on the bank with a bucket. I didn't jump in, I didn't scream loud, I just stood there. At night I kept thinking, if I had run, if I had yelled, would it have changed anything? The wind whistled along the edge of the rock, but in the small pocket between them, the air warmed. Each of them carried a private if only, and now they set those stones down by the fire, the way you lay wet rocks near the coals and let them dry in their own time. Chai, is that part of why you said yes to marrying a man by letter? Eli asked, his tone free of judgment. Because you were afraid of standing still one more time. Mae took longer to answer. Partly, she said. Partly because the older folks would not let it go. They kept saying, a woman nearly 30 should not be picky. If a man writes asking to marry you, you're lucky. I was afraid of staying, of being looked at like something left on the shelf. So I agreed, thought that at least somewhere else I would be the new person. But last night, on the train, I suddenly thought, what if it is worse? Going all that way just to be someone else's leftover in another house. Eli did not rush to comfort her. He only nodded once. You can stop, he said. No one has the right to shove you faster than your fear can follow. If you want, we can wait for the water to drop and cross tomorrow. That man at the store will not die from waiting one more day. Easy for you to say, Mae answered, before she could soften it, then smiled a little at herself. A man alone with a ranch, a horse, land. You can stop wherever you please. Me? Every place I stop belongs to somebody else. Every roof means someone else's rules. Eli tipped his head back against the rock, thinking. My ranch was someone else's once too, he said. My father's. I used to think I had to live exactly how he thought a man should. Hard, fast, never afraid to use his hands. After Annie died, I learned that way of living doesn't save anyone. It just takes more from you. He looked at her straight on this time. If you need somewhere to stop, for a while at least, there is a place, he said. No one hanging rules over you but the ones you make. But that is tomorrow's business. Tonight, our job is to keep this fire going and keep you from freezing. He shrugged out of his outer coat and held it toward her. Her old instinct rose up at once. Every other time a man had offered her his coat, it had come with something expected in return. She hesitated, fingers clutching her own worn fabric. Eli caught it. He stopped with his arm halfway out and did not swing the coat around her shoulders the way men often did when they wanted to force the kindness on. If you do not want it, just say no, he said, laying the coat down on the ground between them instead of putting it on her. It stays here. You take it or you don't. Your choice. I can sit a little farther from the fire if I have to. I will be fine. Mae looked at the coat lying between them, like something resting between two different lives. On one side was habit, taking meant owing. On the other was something new, taking and not paying back with anything she did not truly want to give. She exhaled and reached out, lifting the coat and drawing it around her shoulders. Thank you, she said. If tomorrow I decide not to marry the man in those letters, this might be the first thing I have ever accepted without having to trade away something I did not want to. Eli just nodded, not claiming any great credit. The fire crackled. Rain beat a steady rhythm on the stone above. Two strangers sat facing each other, sharing one flame, one rock roof, and a handful of hard memories. And in the small things, a hand stopping short of a touch, a coat left between them instead of being wrapped around her without asking. The distance began to change, slowly but surely. By the next morning, the rain had passed. From the rock ledge, the creek below looked tame, just a narrow run of water. Eli studied the depth a while and nodded. We can cross now, he said, nice and slow. This time he went on foot in front, hand close on the reins. Mae's horse followed, hooves sinking into the water but not spooking. She was still afraid, but her fingers no longer clenched the saddle horn until they went white. When the horse stepped up onto the far bank, she let out a long breath, feeling as if she had crossed not just a strip of water, but something old inside herself. The road into Willow Gap was shorter than she'd imagined. Low roofs came into view one by one, the ring of a hammer from the blacksmith. the smell of fresh bread from the cafe. Harper's store sat on the corner, sign hanging a little crooked. A thick-waisted man stood on the porch, watching them approach. "Miss Collins," Mr. Harper called, smiling with his mouth but not his eyes. "Thought you'd gotten lost. Come in, the house is waiting. We've got a wedding to plan and duties to talk about." Mae looked at the open doorway, at the shelves inside, the counter, the narrow patch of kitchen. In her mind, she saw the days stacked up ahead, counting beans, tidying shelves, hearing the word duty hanging over her like a hook from the ceiling. "Before I go in, may I ask you one thing?" she said, her voice not loud but clear. "If, later on, I find we don't suit, will I be allowed to leave? Not with shouting, just go." Mr. Harper froze, then gave a short, rough laugh. "What kind of talk is that? Marriage isn't something you come and go from. You're here to stay, to help this household. As for leaving, that's not something we need to discuss." It was no different from 100 answers Mae had heard all her life. The only change was that this time, beside her, there was a man on horseback, reins loose in his hand, looking at her as if to say, "You get to choose." "Then I'm sorry, Mr. Harper," she said slowly. "If I cannot say go from the start, I don't think I ought to step inside. I don't want to stand still for another set of years." His face darkened. He muttered a few threats about reputation and hardship, then turned his back and went into the store, leaving the door open behind him. The little street fell quiet for a heartbeat, then life moved on. For Mae, everything had shifted. She had no house to return to now, but she no longer carried a sentence over her head either. Eli nudged his horse closer. "What will you do now?" he asked, his tone as light as the breeze. Mae looked toward the road out of town, then back at him. "I can sew. I can keep books. I can look for work somewhere," she said. "Or..." She paused. "If what you said last night under the rock still stands, I'd like to try stopping in a place where no one drags me off before I've had time to say yes." "The ranch is still there," Eli answered. "Cattle that need counting, ledgers that need keeping. You can come as a hired hand, a boarder, whatever suits. Anything else can wait. The one thing I am sure of is this: nobody lays a hand on you unless you nod first." Mae smiled, softer this time. She held her hand out for him to help her mount, not because she was rushed, but because she wanted to. They turned away from the main street. Ahead lay the same wide, rough country that had made her shake the day before. Today, that road led somewhere different, to a small ranch, a front porch, and a man who had already shown her that sometimes, just once, stopping in the middle of a rushing stream is enough to turn two strangers' lives onto a new course. Later on in Willow Gap, if anyone asked why the mail-order bride never showed up for Mr. Harper's wedding, folks just shrugged and said, "Guess she changed her mind along the way." Hardly anyone knew that out there in all that wide empty land, there was a creek, a rock ledge, and a moment when a man stopped in the middle of the water and turned back because of the fear in a stranger's eyes. From two strangers on a dusty road, Mae and Eli slowly learned how to move slower again. One step at a time through the water, one day at a time on the ranch. One small choice at a time in a place where no one got dragged along just because someone else said, "It's time." And sometimes that's all it takes to call it a peaceful ending for two people who thought they were nothing but lost out on the western plains. If the story of Mae, Eli, and the little creek at Willow Gap touched you tonight, hit subscribe so we can sit together each evening and listen to more gentle Western love stories like this. Don't forget to click like, Leave a comment about the moment you loved most, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next Tales from the Wild West.